Good day, everyone. Welcome to the first edition of Up Close with Solarplaza, a digital interview in which we will discuss the topics that we will cover throughout the year, in this case specifically for our campaign, Solar Asset Management Europe. Today I have with me Ozer Ergul, Chief Procurement Officer from Lightsource BP. Ozer, thank you for joining.
Thank you, Alfonso, for having me.
Excellent. So today we will be talking about sustainability and more specifically how a comprehensive procurement and asset management strategy can lead to an even greener portfolio. So Ozer, to start, I think a good way to set this interview is to kind of discuss how the increase or the improvements in the EPC phase have led to a direct increase in terms of operational assets. So the better documented the EPC phase is, or the more efficient the EPC phase is, the easier job it is for the asset managers or the operators to continue running the asset in a clean way. And I think what would be interesting to discuss is if there are some similarities with these more comprehensive EPC strategies leading to operational benefits, but from the sustainability side. So I think today I'd like to discuss a bit of your procurement strategies, your construction strategies, and of course discuss how these lead to operational gains from a sustainable standpoint. So to start, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the whole EPC trend, how it's moving towards a bit more of documentation, a bit more of due diligence. How have you been seeing this from the Lightsource side?
Yeah, as you said, Alfonso, on the EPC stage is very important to create a kind of sustainable assets, right? I mean, the quality and the technology you are putting in the EPC stage and the quality of the material, quality of the work basically determines the life cycle of your asset. So it is very important to have a kind of sustainable EPC process, starting with the engineering, then procurement, right? I mean, having a kind of sustainable roadmap. And that's why we are looking into, first of all, most important, I would say, the sustainable step for the EPC and the procurement is economical pillar. I mean, reducing the risk and in selecting your partners, selecting your suppliers, contractors, and selecting your technology to execute those projects. That's why we have very detailed due diligence and when selecting, onboarding our suppliers and contractors to identify and mitigate any risk during the construction and after.
Excellent. And talking in this identifying on the procurement phase, I might imagine, you have your standards for identifying trustworthy partners or good partners. But in terms of sustainability, and I think the biggest cost in terms of environmental cost for solar is the materials, right? The components. So when we're talking, as the head of global procurement, when you're looking at let's say CO2 output in all of your procurement, how do you quantify or how do you try to understand, how much CO2 is being produced by the creation of your solar assets, and what lessons have you seen there?
Very good question. As you know, the solar PV is a very important source of energy to greening the industries and creating a kind of low carbon emission and the environment. But when you procure those components, right, you are already assuming a kind of scope 3 emission. This is coming from production methods of your suppliers. If you break down a 1 megawatt plant into material intensity, so it's like 70 tons we are using glass, and it's about another one is steel, 52 tons of steel average for 1 megawatt of solar. So if you look at those components, glass, steel, and aluminum, these are very high carbon emission and intensity production method. So because you need to heat up those the iron ore to more than 1000 degrees. To do this, you need to use basically carbon or very high intensity source of energy. If you take steel example, I mean, to produce 1 ton of steel, and this creates like 2 tons of carbon. So it is quite intensive. We are mapping and our supply chain. Okay, who is using what kind of steel making process, right? Not all steel making processes are the same, equally pollutant. If you choose, for instance, blast furnace, this is majority of the global production, like 70% of the global production coming from this technology. But there's also low carbon technologies like the electric blast furnace. So we are checking, and what is the source of our tracker or the structure suppliers using. If you look at the piles, for instance, they're mainly coming from electric arc furnaces. So low carbon. I mean, if you are talking about 2 tons of carbon for normal process, this electric furnace is create like 0.6 tons. I mean, it's like a 1/3 less. I mean, 2/3 less than the normal production. So we are mapping our supply chain according to carbon footprint of our suppliers. Right? And there's a big tendency, right? I mean, and to go decarbonization or the low carbon, not only steel, but also also for glass. And there's a good initiative in European Commission and low carbon glass. And this will be available. First pilot will be 2025, and the same thing happened in aluminum. Aluminum, as you may know, we are using the frames. Aluminum, very specific, very interesting material. Everybody thinks that, for instance, we are using like 19 to 20 tons of aluminum for 1 megawatt plant, but everybody thinks that steel is more pollutant, but aluminum, in fact, is like 6 times more pollutant than the steel. So in fact, the total carbon footprint using aluminum in 1 megawatt, it is higher than steel. So this is a kind of hidden danger in our solar PV industry. But we are glad to see that there are good initiatives and low carbon aluminum, especially if smelters are using hydro, like in Norway, they're almost going into the zero carbon aluminum. We are looking into a couple of tier below, right? I mean, we are going to upstream to understand what are the low carbon technologies, and we are getting our ready and to have a kind of the future-proof supply chain strategy. And this is what I can tell in terms of carbon emission and the carbon inventory that we are tracking in our scope 3.
Yeah, sounds good. I think you, just to highlight what you were mentioning, that sometimes it can be tricky, let's say, to quantify the emissions of in this case a solar asset, right? You assume that you're generating green kilowatt hours, so you're kind of playing your role. And then I think you make a very interesting point when you say you have to start looking upstream at your different producers or manufacturers, because that kind of proves a point, right? That these decisions, of course, suppliers are also playing an important role, but these decisions, they will supply whatever their client is asking for, right? So having a larger asset owners kind of pivot or transition in this mindset of sustainable is also part of a green asset is kind of the move that solar needs to make sure the entire industry moves forward, right? It needs to come from the asset owners, from the people who are generating the electricity, and then it'll go down through all the suppliers or different partners. So that's quite interesting for the procurement phase, really. And then that brings us, of course, to the next stage, right? The construction phase. I think something that blew my mind was what you just mentioned in terms of aluminum being so carbon intensive, and even steel, right? If a ton is creating 2 tons, it seems like it's an uphill battle. So in terms of construction, what are some some good practices in maybe reducing the environmental footprint, either in terms of reducing your material or in terms of trying to minimize the environmental impact in the construction phase? I know for a fact that a couple of your plants at Lightsource, you'll spread, let's say, a specific seeding in order to create like natural fencing, right? So shrubs can replace metal fences, and these fences actually, you can save up on a bit of metal. So I don't know if that's a good example, or if you have another one off the top of your head. And how can you reduce materials or just improving the environmental friendliness of your construction site?
Yeah, very, very good point. And for procurement, if I combine with procurement, right, we are trying to support the communities that we are building the plants, and we are trying to focus on the local sources instead of importing the material. First, our priority is using the local manufacturing to support the communities there. This will also offset some of the carbon footprint because we will not be shipping the components from another continent. This is one thing we are taking care of. I mean, we are always trading. We are not only looking at the cost, but we are trading off with the carbon footprint and the social responsibility. And for Lightsource, we see our farms not only source of the clean energy, but also opportunity to maintain the biodiversity and the boost ecosystem productivity. That's fine. And we are careful designing our plants. And for instance, if you look at the land usage, our PV equipment only represent like 30% of the land we are using, right? We are leaving a great amount of the area for the wildlife. And as you said, we are carefully planning the ecosystem, and we are not. We are trying to maintain the flora and fauna, and we are helping the wildlife. We are placing the bird nets. We are using the natural fences, and we are also designing our plants so that wildlife can go under them, and they use them as shelter during the rain or snowy days. And also, we are using the sheep grazing instead of to maintain the vegetation under the solar plants. We're also placing the beehives, and it's a kind of dual usage, right? I mean, we are not only using our plants for generating electricity, but also the providing proper the environment for the biodiversity. And we are also carefully selecting the seeding, and after completing the plant for the first plantation time, we are carefully placing the plants or the seeding so that the biodiversity and the ecosystem can maintain sustainably.
I think quite interesting the way you mention two ways, biodiversity is affected. One, of course, in different, creating natural corridors along the plant where, squirrels can walk around freely, or, understanding certain fencing and instead of a physical metal fence, adding, bushes or shrubs can also help the local populace. But the last two that you mentioned, I think, are particularly interesting if we pivot towards the asset management or the operational phase of the project. In terms, first, I'd like to start with sheep, right? I think the idea for it is quite interesting. You're connecting solar energy, so renewable energy, with another big industry, which is agriculture, also known to be a CO2 or water intensive industry. So the premise of this, or the main idea, is the sheep get free food, and in return a solar asset gets vegetation management. Can you share a bit of your experience? I can imagine this is not applicable to every single plant, right? There needs to be certain criteria that they fit. I'm sure sheep safety even needs to be taken into account to a certain degree, because those in the agriculture world are also assets, so they need to be careful. So if you can tell us a bit more on the sheep.
Yeah, as you rightly said that, I mean, this is not this option is not available with all the plants. I mean, this depends on the topography and the location of your plants, right? And some of our sites are grazed by sheep, as I said, and which eliminates the need to mow the grass under panels, right? And this requires careful planning, and the HSC precautions to be taken before letting this happening, right? I mean, so this is that's why we are collaborating with the environmental experts and the local communities and the farmers, and to understand the suitability of the plant and the so reliability of this sheep management, right? I mean, this kind of joint efforts, and as I said, it's not available for all plants, but this requires close cooperation with the local authorities, farmers, and the environmental experts to define the way of operation.
Great, thank you. Yeah, especially I think the local community is an important one. I think in the last 2 years, the solar industry as a whole in Europe has noticed that with the increase in solar installations in more rural areas, slowly community acceptance or community denial or opposition are kind of an important topic that also has to be dealt with. I think a practical example is a German offshore wind farm a couple of years ago that could not take off because simply there was no community acceptance. And that is also, a big part of renewables and sustainability. I think it's understanding the local needs and trying to cater for them, while of course keeping your asset operational and profitable, of course. The second and last topic on biodiversity I'd like to discuss with you also is the pollinator habitats. I think that one is also equally interesting because in this case you cannot, let's say, leverage what the bees are doing, or butterflies for that matter, any pollinator, to what they're doing in the operational phase. But at the same time, it's a huge environmental service what is being done in terms of of increasing the number of pollinators in the local habitat. So how do you weigh in that one? I've heard some funny stories, some horror stories almost in South Carolina, where there's a bit too many bees and it's a warm day, and that means the O&M team has a hard time cleaning some boxes or fixing some cables because there's a lot of of warm bees flying around. Of course, this is a minor issue, but I think it's still something to be highlighted. The idea of bees also requires a certain level of planning, right? You cannot just go around throwing beehives throughout your assets. And what are your thoughts on this? What are your pollinator habitat strategies?
Yeah, this is, I believe that the beehive installation and the maintaining the bees in the under solar PV plants is relatively easier than grazing the sheep, right? Grazed by sheep. And because this is they are quite modular, we are working with the local bee farming ventures to host the hives and our solar farms. And because we are seeding the species rich grass and the wildflowers, and so they can contribute and the ecosystem. Having more pollinators among the farmlands also furthers the aim of cultivation and more diverse, more biodiverse environment, wildlife, and it can be benefit for food production and surrounding fields. As I said, I mean, beehives you can move around and you can. It's not like ship, but I think if you look our story about the bee farming in London area, so this is very interesting story, and it is this video is available also in the internet sources. And this is great investment, not only for our plants, not only investment for the energy generation, but also for biodiversity and the bee farming that in danger, right? Especially in the urban areas, close to urban areas. We believe that this is very important value add to the social and environmental and the pillar.
And I can imagine the local community, you know, under the assumption that it's a agricultural land or an agricultural community, the idea of an increased biodiverse presence is actually a benefit for them. Like you were mentioning, you know, the idea of more biodiverse crops or healthier crops, just more pollinators in the area tends to mean well for nature. So this one's an interesting one in my opinion, because in this case, there is no direct operational benefit, but there is clearly a much bigger, you know, environmental benefit attached to it. And that kind of brings me to my final point, which is, you know, what are the next steps from here? You know, we heard in the procurement phase, it makes sense to create a CO2 inventory and kind of understand your suppliers. In the construction phase, you know, the more eco-friendly you can make it at that point, the more, you know, sustainable, the easier it'll be throughout your operational phase to keep everything in check, you know, in terms of sheep or bees in this case. But you know, what's next? Because I can imagine these things obviously come at a cost. We slightly discussed the additional cost of carbon neutral materials, even though everyone's expecting, you know, that cost to go down throughout the years, like all technologies. It is still quite steep. But could you see from a, you know, EU regulatory standpoint a move, or would you think it's prudent, you know, to kind of incentivize asset owners to, of course, there used to be huge incentives in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, all over Europe on expanding in solar. Maybe the next wave of incentives can also include, or the next wave of regulatory policy can also include a green solar asset and what that really means. What are your thoughts? Could you see this working in terms of, you know, helping your local agricultural community and making sure you source locally, and in turn, you know, you get some sort of incentives as well?
Yeah, as you said, I mean, there's a big tendency and to the decarbonization of low carbon, especially after this Paris pledge, and most of the industries switched to accelerated their efforts towards the zero carbon or low carbon products. And the European Commission start supporting those technologies in terms of low carbon steel, low carbon glass. There will be a kind of steep learning curve. I mean, of course, in the beginning, we expect that those products will be more expensive, but they're going to compete with the 100 years of technologies, right? I mean, if you compare with the EV production, EV cars, you can see that the gap is closing very rapidly. I mean, we expect the same thing, and for the low carbon glass and low carbon steel, but they will remain a bit expensive, right? I mean, because there's a big investment into new technologies, and we believe that especially hydrogen will help and greatly, because there's a cost of the producing the green hydrogen as a fuel for the steel and the glass. And in the beginning, we assume some premium to pay, and there are different projections how it will be how much it will be more expensive, and the kind of incentivization and the using low carbon products and the supporting local communities. These are the expectations from developers. I believe it will be accelerating the shift from high carbon energy to low carbon economy, and the definitely a kind of support from the governments and the institutions will help for adoption of the new technologies, and this is what we believe. So it is interesting. The technology is coming up, but as buyer, we don't like to tell the price, right? I mean, we don't like to see the price. As if you are buying electric vehicle, that you are not only buying that for fuel is free, because you have a mindset, you have ecological mindset, sustainable mindset that you are trying to take a part in this effort. So this we can consider the company as the same. So it's not all about money. It is also this kind of social responsibility.
I think as the industry makes this shift, as it notices bigger companies making the shift, the rest of the industry will have to follow as well. Thank you very much for this, breakdown on how operations in the EPC phase can really influence sustainability in what is already a green asset, but it can always be greener, of course. If anyone is interested in more information about this, you can always follow our Solar Asset Management Europe campaign. The video related to the bees in the pollinator habitats for Lightsource BP that Ozer was mentioning will also be made available here with a link on the Solar Asset Management Europe website, and we'll be continuing to send content this way for anyone who's a subscriber to the mailing list. So I highly encourage to look at that, look at our upcoming interviews, upcoming webinars, upcoming white papers. We'll be discussing everything solar asset management and sustainability related. So thanks everyone. That'll be all for today.